Ah, hello, dear friends, and welcome to the second part of a whispered read-through of the 70 greatest mysteries of the ancient world, unlocking the secrets of past civilizations. In the first part, we discovered how some biblical stories and Greek legends may have been inspired by real geographical historical events. Let's continue by looking into the Trojan War, which could have happened sometime around the 13th century BC south of the Dardanelles. An excerpt from Homer here. Zeus has sent us this sign, long in coming, and long ere it be fulfilled, though its fame shall last forever, as the serpent ate the 8 fledglings and the sparrow that hatched them, which makes 9, so shall we fight 9 years at Troy, but in the 10th shall take the town. Here we have a 17th century Flemish painter, Peter Paul Rubens, depicting Paris, the son of Priam, the king of Troy, presenting the golden apple to Aphrodite in the famous beauty contest staged at the wedding of Peleus and memorialized in Homer's Iliad as the judgment of Paris. So the legend of the Trojan War begins as a story of rivalry between 3 beautiful women, Hera, the wife of Zeus, and their daughters Aphrodite and Athena. Their jealousy erupts at the wedding celebration for the mortal king Peleus and his new wife Thetis. The sea nymph Eris, the goddess of discord, brought along a golden apple to the ceremony, which he announced was a gift to the fairest woman there. You're quite popular if your wedding is being attended by goddesses and gods, like a Disney movie. The goddesses Hera, Aphrodite and Athena all laid claim to the apple and the title, but Eris not so innocently suggested that Zeus make the decision as to which of the women in his family was most deserving. Zeus wisely declined and passed the difficult task instead to Paris. He was the son of Priam, king of Troy. What a situation to be in, because Hera promised Paris unimagined power if she were his choice. Athena offered him historic glory on the field of battle, and Aphrodite promised the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. So, forsaking the attractions of political power and military glory, Paris presented the golden apple to Aphrodite, a decision that's been immortalized down the centuries as the judgment of Paris. Typical bloke. So at the same time, the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, daughter of Zeus and Leda, but she was already married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta, and to make matters worse, fearful that this marriage to one of her many suitors would provoke bitter fighting among the others, Helen's mortal stepfather, Tyndareus, had elicited a promise from all the other Greek rulers and warriors to protect Helen's marriage to Menelaus. So in Troy, Paris contrived to have himself assigned as the Trojan ambassador to Sparta, and on his arrival, Aphrodite used her power to cause Helen to fall in love with Paris, and they absconded to Troy together with the better part of Menelaus' wealth. And that was the stage set for a decade-long conflict waged by the Greeks, who sent 1,000 ships against Troy in an attempt to retrieve the wife and wealth of the king of Sparta. So the actual Trojan War that happens in the Iliad dates from around 750 BC, and Greek historians, notably Herodotus and Thucydides, readily accepted Homer's tale and believed that Troy was an actual city near the Hellespont, the narrow straits today called the Dardanelles, and that the Trojan War with the Greeks, united under the Mycenaean ruler Agamemnon, was a historical fact. But modern writers and scholars are more sceptical. There are no historical records that verify Homer's tale or even confirm the existence of Troy, but the general theme of the Iliad is about a lengthy campaign into Western Asia by a united Greek force, perhaps for slaves and natural resources, which is plausible. Here is an artist's reconstruction of Homeric Troy, encircled by its impregnable walls and guarded by towers. And below here, what do we have? We've got the entrance gate and tower at Troy. The cross-section of the mound at Isaric, showing the complex sequence of superimposed layers. it seems similar to Hisarlik, though it's not uniquely so, because the archaeological evidence points to people searching south of the Dardanelles in the region historically called the Troad, on the assumption that it was once ruled by ancient Troy, and the most interest has focused on the mound at Hisarlik, whose location generally conforms to the geography of Troy as described by Homer, and many of the details also line up as well. Heinrich Schliemann is most closely associated with the search for it. He excavated Hisarlik in a series of campaigns between 1870 and 1890, discovering a number of superimposed cities in the mound, and discovering through other 9 primary occupations further work at Hisarlik over the years by archaeologists such as Carl Blagan and Manfred Kaufmann identified multiple subphases. Though nothing was found, it proved that it is in fact the location of Homer's Troy. That nothing can prove that, but it does conform a lot to Homer's description of the time and place, because he's describing it with fine towers and lofty gates, which seems to suit Troy 6, which is large and impressive, though admittedly not uniquely so. And more specifically, Homer mentions the city wall at Troy was a magnificently engineered defensive structure, but it was poorly built along its western flank. So Troy 6 is over 4 meters thick in walls, in places more than 9 meters tall, but exhibits inferior construction along its western side. Homer also mentions a great tower located at the main gate of the city, and archaeologists have determined that an imposing gate flanked the entrance of Troy 6. So I'm guessing that's it. Here we have Schliemann's wife Sophie wearing the jewels and the treasures of Priam. They inspired tremendous interest in Schliemann's discovery, but also exposed his excesses and ego. Here's a gold source boat from Priam's treasure. The treasure disappeared from Berlin at the end of the Second World War, and its whereabouts were a mystery until it was rediscovered in Moscow. Clearly, the residents of Hisarlik and Troy had been in contact with the Mycenaean world, because Bronze Age artifacts from Greece, in particular Mycenaean pottery, were found at the site. And spectacular objects recovered by Schliemann also indicate the presence of a powerful royal family, as would be expected from Homer. So the treasure of Priam included gold rings, bracelets, 2 breathtaking gold diadems, one of which became known as the Jewels of Helen. A photograph of his wife wearing them has become an icon of Schliemann's large ego and love of notoriety. And it's recently been determined that the hoard actually dates to Troy 2, the second city in the 9-level sequence, and therefore dates about 1,000 years before the Trojan War. And there is the evidence in the form of traces of fire and fallen masonry of violent destruction at the end of both Troy 6 and 7 phases. However, the 6 seems to have been destroyed not by military force but by earthquake, and 7 was more likely damaged in battle. And some people argue, therefore, that it's Troy 7 that more closely corresponds to Homer's Troy. Of course, the famous Trojan horse here, depicted on an amphora from Mykonos, dating from the later 7th century BC. Homer makes numerous references to the fine breeding of Trojan horses, and there is archaeological evidence consisting of numerous horse bones and horse-related hardware matches, though again not uniquely so. Homer's Troy. The equine at Troy most people are familiar with is the so-called Trojan horse, of course, an enormous wooden representation of one that they left as a gift to Athena, and retreated, appearing to have finally given up, but were inside, and at nightfall the Greek soldiers came out and attacked the city. Remarkably, the Trojan horse described by Homer may have some historical validity. Really? There are written descriptions and artistic representations in the Near East dating from around the 13th century of battering rams used to break through a city's defences, built in the form of horses. Okay. The historian Michael Wood suggests that the Trojan horse in the Iliad may have been a transmuted recollection of just such a siege machine, certainly more fantastical than just a straight-up horse-faced battering ram, I suppose. So whether the Trojan War was a legend or history, or both, can't be determined definitively. So it's clear that the Iliad contains a number of accurate descriptions of Bronze Bronze Age geography, politics and material culture, but there is also a stratum of truth in the subtext of the story. The cautionary conclusion of American classicist Jeremy B. Rutter is worth quoting. Belief or disbelief in the historicity of the Trojan War becomes, in the end, an act of faith, whichever position one adopts. Here we have at number 7 Theseus and the Minotaur, mythical or Bronze Age, and taking place in Crete of the Aegean. Quote from Ovid here. So Minos, moved to gather his disgrace, resolved to hide the monster in a prison, and he built it with intricate design. By Daedalus contrived, an architect of wonderful ability, and famous this prison he planned of mazy wanderings that deceived the eyes and labyrinthic passages. So according to Apollodorus of Athens, our 2nd century BC source for the story of Theseus and the Minotaur can be traced back to fragments of which can be traced back to the late 6th century BC. Theseus, an ancient king of Athens. His father was the mortal king Aegeus, but it's also asserted that the god Poseidon was Theseus' biological father. The story of Theseus has one of its central themes being a young man's coming of age, overcoming daunting challenges. And after Theseus' birth in the country village of Trojan, Aegeus placed his sword and sandals under a large boulder, instructing his wife Aethra to keep the boy in the village until he was old enough and strong enough to recover these items from under the rock. When that time comes to pass, Theseus is to join his father in Athens. He grew up, became large and powerful, easily lifted the boulder and recovered his father's belongings. Travelled to Athens, and Aethra pleaded with him to go by sea, but Theseus elected to travel by the more dangerous land route, infested with brigands, highwaymen and wild animals. He overcame many dangers along the road, using his enormous strength and great guile, and successfully met each challenge. For example, he threw the outlaw Sciron into the sea, killed the malevolent Procrustes, and also dispatched the ferocious wild sow of Crommyon, which must have been far fiercer than it sounds. Here we have usually depicted as a heartless monster. In this painting by G.F. Watts, the Minotaur appears somewhat wistful, looking out to sea. When Theseus arrived in Athens, he was confronted by a great tragedy. Several years previously, Apollodorus says it was 3 generations before the Trojan War. Androgenes, the son of King Minos and Crete, had been killed in a battle against Athens, and in his rage and grief, King Minos had demanded a blood payment, which the Athenians elected to honour to avoid a larger conflict with Crete. Each year, and in some versions every 9 years, 7 young Athenian men and 7 maidens were taken to Crete, where they were given to the horrible Chimera, the half-human, half-bull Minotaur, which slaughtered them in its labyrinthine prison. So the origin of the Minotaur can be traced to a vain attempt by King Minos to take advantage of the gods. Minos prayed for a perfect bull to sacrifice, and Poseidon consented. The bull was such a magnificent creature that he decided to keep it and sacrifice another less perfect specimen. Poseidon realized what he'd done and concocted a malevolent punishment. The god cast a spell on Minos' wife, Pasiphae, causing her to fall deeply and hopelessly in love with the heavenly bull. She consummated this love for the bull, became pregnant, and gave birth to the Minotaur. Oh my. And Minos had the architect Daedalus construct a labyrinth in which the Minotaur was imprisoned, thus protecting the citizens of Crete from its depredations. Theseus arrived as the latest group were being taken, volunteered to be chosen, convinced that he could defeat the Minotaur and end the sacrifice. King Aegeus tried to dissuade his son, but ultimately agreed, with one proviso: if he was successful in confronting the Minotaur and navigating the labyrinth, upon his return, the ship must replace the black sails with white, so that his father would have a signal that he prevailed. Of course, once there, as we see with this maze, this labyrinthine maze, and this lovely sculpture by Antonio Canova, sitting on the Minotaur after having defeated him. Minos' daughter, the clever Ariadne, immediately fell in love with Theseus and devised a simple strategy to prevent getting lost. She gave him the ball of silk twine that he used, and he could get back in. But it took him so long to return that he forgot to switch the ship's sails. So archaeology has spied the returning ship with black sails unfurled, and in mistaken but inconsolable grief leapt from a high precipice into the sea, ending his own life. So is there any archaeological evidence for this myth? Certainly we can rule out the existence of a half-bull, half-man beast, but it is interesting that Apollodorus situates King Minos on Crete. So archaeological work in the site of Knossos began in 1900 by Sir Arthur Evans, revealing the existence of a previously unknown civilization. Evans called it Minoan, after King Minos, and ascertained that it was at its peak between around 1650 and 1420 BC. The ancient Cretans practiced a religion in which bulls clearly had a significant role. A well-known fresco found in the enormous Minoan palace of Knossos depicts acrobats somersaulting over a bull in what may be a religious ceremony. And there's loads of bull horns on all of the walls, and liquid bottles with the palace with the naturalistic shape of bulls' heads. So in the plan, the Palace of Knossos exhibits a confusing warren of hundreds and perhaps as many as 1,000 rooms spread out over more than 20,000 square metres, 5 acres. So it is a labyrinthian structure. So people have made the connection between the labyrinth being the actual palace of the temple, and long after the temple had been abandoned, Cretans struck coins with the Minotaur displayed on one side and a schematic maze representing the labyrinth on the other. I mean, that is a very confusing design of a building, isn't it? A plan of the palace at Knossos. Is the bull's head right on a ritual vessel for liquids from Knossos? That's incredible, isn't it? Amazing vessel. There's a coin that people, a silver starter from a stater from Knossos with a running minotaur. The myth of Theseus and the Minotaur seems to incorporate some actual history, viewed for a period of time in which the Greeks were subservient to the Minoan civilization, and the Minotaur's labyrinth might represent a mythologized interpretation of the complex maze of rooms. Researchers Rodney Castleton and J. Leslie Fitton separately argue that Theseus' killing of the Minotaurs, thereby putting an end to the terrible blood price paid by the Greeks to the Minoans, may be seen as a mythic metaphor for the historical ascendancy of Greek civilization and their escape from Bronze Age Minoan domination. That would make sense. Another allegory. Here we have Jason and the Argonauts, taking place perhaps in the 8th century BC, or a mythical event in the Black Sea area. Taking my start from you, Phoebos, I shall recall the glorious deeds of men long ago who propelled the well-benched Argo through the mouth of the Pontos and between the dark rocks to gain the Golden Fleece. So the legend of Jason and the Argonauts, whose theme is that of a young hero's rite of passage by a voyage to and return from a distant place, has deep roots in Greece. So, as we know with Jason, Peleus, who was the brother of the king, Jason, king of Argos and Thessaly, tires of the mantle of power and passes it to Peleus, but only until the rightful heir, Jason, reaches adulthood. Peleus was warned to beware the man wearing only one sandal, and predictably, when Jason becomes a grown man and lays claim to the throne, he arrives at the palace so short, having lost a sandal on his journey. Fearing him and refusing to step down, he devises a ruse to remove him permanently. So basically, before power, he needs to recover the fabled golden fleece located in distant Colchis, as is the rightful property of Jason's family. So intrigued, he agrees to set out on it on the Argo and amasses a crew of heroes and demigods including Theseus, Hercules and Orpheus, to help him accomplish his task. So no one accepts as accurate the more fantastic elements, golden fleece, sheep, gods, demigods, but many contend that the tale incorporates geographic information gathered in the early maritime expeditions by ancient Greek soldiers exploring eastwards into the Mediterranean and Black Sea. So along with several other attempts to demonstrate a historical basis for traditions of voyages to distant lands. So for example, the Chinese story of Fusang, or Saint Brendan's journey to the land promised to the saints. The argument for the historicity of Jason's voyage is not based on material evidence. For example, countries they explored. Because apparently in the Argonautica, Jason and his men construct a number of shrines along their route which could have been discoverable by archaeologists. Instead, the assertion of a historical basis for the story of Jason and the Argonauts is based essentially on geography. Simply, readers of Jason's tale have scoured his story for descriptions that are detailed enough to identify the locations mentioned as actual places. So using this approach, most scholars of Greek myth believe that the kingdom of Colchis was located as Apollonius described it on the eastern margin of the Euxine Sea, the Greek name for the Black Sea, in the modern Republic of Georgia. So it shows that Greeks explored and colonised the Black Sea's coast in antiquity. There were Greek colonies there dating back to the 7th century BC. Here's Tim Severin's replica ship on a voyage following the route of Jason and the Argonauts. What an amazing trip to go on there. And a gold pendant with the head of Athena from Kuloba, an example of Greek gold working from the Black Sea. Greek knowledge and exploration of the area's gold deposits might have contributed to the story of the Golden Fleece. According to Apollonius, Jason's voyage took him from the ancient Greek port city of Iolcus to the entrance of the Dardanelles and through the perilous passage between the clashing rocks, the Cyclades, that guard the entrance to the Black Sea at the Bosporus. From there they sailed along the east across the North Turkish coast, ultimately reaching Colchis. On the return trek, they simply didn't backtrack, but instead sailed at a more northerly bearing. Reaching a large river, Apollonius calls the Istris, which is almost certainly the Danube, a river known to the ancient Greeks. So they sailed that and mistakenly believed emptied into the Adriatic Sea. And then they managed to take the Argo into a river Apollonius calls Rhodanus, which appears to be the Rhone in France. Jason follows the Rhodanus south, where Apollonius understands that it flowed into the Mediterranean. Then they sailed south along the west coast of Italy, between the Wandering Rocks, marking the straits between Thrinacia, which is Sicily and Italy, making landfalls on the North African coast before returning north past Crete and back in Iolcus. So a mega journey. Alternatively, they may have gone as far as the River Don in Russia, which would have taken the Argo into the Volga and ultimately into the Barents Sea, where the travellers turned west, following the European coast, eventually turning east through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean and home to Iolcus. Moving the Argo across the miles of dry land required in that route, though, might have seemed like an insurmountable problem, but we are, of course, talking about heroes and demigods, so they would have had demigods, so they could have done it. And there's an even more ambitious northern route, proposed by the fantastic voyage of Henriette Mertz in her book The Wine Dark Sea. In 1964, according to Mertz, Colchis isn't a kingdom on the Black Sea, but is a principality located just south of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, South America. So Apollonius' description of the clashing rocks represents a natural tidal phenomenon. According to Mertz, applies nowhere in the Black Sea, but it's a perfect match for the strait between Cuba and Haiti. She further claims that the Argonauts eventually sailed northwards parallel with the coast of North America before returning home to Greece. So certainly there's no archaeological evidence or sites in Brazil or Northern Europe or ancient Greek artifacts or any known objects in Northern Europe or the New World in archaeological context in Greece. Like all such works woven into the fiction writer's loom, there are certainly threads of truth, but Jason's tale wasn't intended as history. It's the story of the hero's quest, a young man's coming of age, not a memoir. Archaeological evidence of Greek colonies on the Black Sea coast, however, do support the hypothesis that Jason's tale was based on Greek knowledge of their geography at the edges of their known world. Which makes sense. Here we have the 10 lost tribes of Israel, 8th century BC onwards, in Israel. Days will surely come, says the Lord, when the oath shall no more be, as the Lord lives who brought the Israelites out of Egypt, but rather it shall be, as the Lord lives who brought the Israelites out of the north land, and out of all the lands where he had banished them, for I will return them to their land that I gave to their fathers. So in 721 BC, BC, the Assyrian king Sargon the Great marched south with his army through Syria and attacked the kingdom of Israel, razed the capital Samaria, and the king deported the leaders of the nation together with their families to northern Syria to start new lives as farmers, craftsmen, and traders. So the people of Israel at that time comprised the tribes of Reuben, Gad, Asher, Ephraim, Manasseh, Dan, Naphtali, Issachar, Simeon, and Zebulun. And even though the exiles formed only a minority of this population, they have entered popular folklore as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So what happened to them? Very little historical fact. There's a great deal of speculation and traditions in many parts of the world. The information in the Hebrew Bible is sparse. So in 2 Kings 17 verse 6 we are told that some were resettled in northern Syria in the Habba Valley near Gozan Tel Alaf, and another unknown town called Hala. The rest of the exiles were sent to towns east of Assyria and Media. So in all probability, the exiles were simply assimilated among local peoples within very few generations. But there's one exception: the Jews of Iraqi Kurdistan, who speak a form of Neo-Aramaic, closely related to the language at the time of the exile, immigrated to the modern state of Israel in the first half of the 20th century. Other Kurdish Jews came from Iran and from Turkey, and today there are approximately 100,000 of them in Israel. Their language, the area of northern Iraq and Syria and eastern Turkey that they came from, and not least their own traditions, combine to demonstrate convincingly that there are at least some true descendants of the Assyrian exile. So here we have the tribes of Israel encamped around the tabernacle in the desert from a Bible of 1557. Here we have a relief in the Paris of Sennacherib, 700 BC, of a family being taken into exile from Lachish, Judah, captured by the Assyrians. A family from the kingdom of Israel going into exile 20 years later would no doubt have looked very similar to this. And here we have the community of Judaism in Burma. Leon Tual, the secretary of the Beth Shalom community, did him in 1987. So Orthodox Jews believe that the tribes still exist beyond the mythical river Sambation, and that God will restore them to their homeland in the Messianic age in accordance with biblical prophecy. From medieval times down to the 19th century at least, Jews and Christians have searched for this fabled Jewish realm, reputably in the East or perhaps in Africa, where the lost tribes wait patiently for the millennial kingdom before they can return home. There's an immense amount of literature on the subject. Claims have been made by or on behalf of the Mormons, the Japanese, the Pathans of Pakistan, the Nepalese, the American Indians, and even the British and Americans, to name only a few. So in some cases there might be an element of truth to these claims. In the century after the Assyrian destruction of Israel, so many refugees gravitated south to the still autonomous kingdom of Judah, especially its capital Jerusalem. But seeing the grave threat to their independent existence from Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt, the great powers of the day, people were already beginning to migrate from both Israel and Judah. So a prophecy of Isaiah, who lived in the reign of Ezekiel of Judah, speaks of a time when the Lords will restore the diaspora from the lands of Assyria, Patros, Nubia, Elam, Shinar, and Hamat, the earliest overseas colony of Jews, which could have, we have documentary proof, was at Yeb in Egypt, now called Elephantine, the island in the Nile near the first cataract at Aswan, where there was a Jewish temple for a short while during the late 5th century. They are probably serving as mercenaries for the Egyptian king. It's quite likely during the last reign of the last Babylonian king Nabonidus that groups of Jews accompanied this king on his lengthy journey to Arabia, and probably foreseeing the demise of the Babylonian Empire at the hands of the Medes and Persians, they apparently decided to stay. But it's also known from the Bible that Cyrus the Great, the victorious Persian king, issued a series of edicts in 538 BC, allowing the return of exiled communities to their homelands, but not all exiled Jews wished to return to Judah. So enclaves of Jewish settlers were already to be found outside their homeland in the 6th and 5th centuries. Then, during the Hellenistic and Roman periods, the diaspora increased until it had spread around the Mediterranean, as a cursory glance at the journeys of St. Paul in the New Testament will reveal. So it wouldn't be surprising then if these Jewish migrations moved eastwards as well as westwards. It's known that in comparatively recent times there were Jewish communities in both Arabia and China, just as there are still some groups in India. So the Pathans are devout Muslims who live in Pakistan, India, Afghanistan and Iran, and although Muslims, they call themselves the Beni Israel, people of Israel, and they have retained many Jewish customs such as the Sabbath, which they keep as a day of rest as the Jewish way. The Mizo tribe and the Beni Menashe, children of Manasseh in Burma, worship Iwa, a name which is not unlike that of the god of Israel. And in northwest China there are people called the Qingmin who believe they're the descendants of Abraham, and they have a special priestly caste who offer sacrifice and place great emphasis on racial purity. Here is a depiction of the supposed order of march of Israelites to Japan, partly taken from ancient pictures, 1877. There are obviously too many examples of groups to cite them all, but there's nothing inherently impossible about the claims. Jews did wander far and wide, and they settled in many remote places, and their descendants could have been absorbed into the wider community. And in Africa too, there are groups who claim Jewish origin. The Ethiopian Jews, mostly today in Israel, are the best known, but there is another group of people scattered throughout southern Africa who may be justified in their claim to be the Black Jews of Africa. They're the Lumber people, whose oral history recently been documented by Tudor Parfitt at the University of London. They've always asserted that their forebears come from the north, ultimately from a place called Sinna, although they don't know where that was. And they also believe, although it's not proven, that they have links with the Jews of Ethiopia. They observe the Jewish laws of kashrut, what foods may or may not be eaten, and may well have introduced the ritual of circumcision into southern Africa. So Dr. Parfitt was intrigued by the little he could glean from them of their own history, undertook a journey to trace their origins, leading from South Africa through Zimbabwe and ultimately to the Yemen in the southwestern corner of Arabia, and found the ancient town of Sinna, to which he believes the Lemba tradition refers. However, one further piece of evidence lends considerable weight to the Lemba's belief regarding their origins. A genetic study was carried out on adult Jewish men in the US, Britain and Israel, and it found more than 70% of Kohanim, the priestly clan who claimed direct descent from the Aaron, the brothers of Moses, who was charged with the high priesthood, have a common set of DNA markers on their Y chromosomes, with a significantly higher percentage than is found in adult Jewish males who are not Kohanim. So the incidence in non-Jewish male groups is even lower, so it tends to substantiate the claim of the Kohanim that they may indeed have all had a common ancestor roughly 3,000 years ago. Subsequent tests on the men of the Lemba tribe indicated virtually the same occurrence of this DNA marker as is found in Jewish men generally. What is more, the senior Lemba clan, the Buba, show a very much higher incidence of this chromosome marker, as high as 53.8%, which is approaching the rate among the Jewish government themselves, so no non-Jewish group is found to have anything approaching this incidence of the unique genetic marker. It doesn't definitively prove the Lemba's case, but it does add considerable weight to their claim of Jewish ancestry. While it's unlikely, although not impossible, that these groups do actually stem from the Israel's so-called 10 lost tribes, genetic testing would at least demonstrate conclusively whether they have within their number men whose chromosomes demonstrated Jewish, perhaps a priestly lineage, and we might never solve the problem of the lost tribes themselves, but we may be able to find the families of some lost Jews of the past 2 millennia. I had no idea about the tribes and the spreads here. This is a procession of Lemba and Venderland in South Africa, where the Lemba believe they introduced the worship of the one god, whom they call Mwali, into Southern Africa, and also brought the practice of circumcision to the religion. And there are also strong memories of their great association with the great site of Zimbabwe. We have something very Indiana Jonesy here, the quest for the Ark of the Covenant, perhaps in the 13th century BC in Israel. So whenever the ark moved forward, then Moses said, "Rise up, Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. Let those who hate you flee before you." And whenever it is halted, he said, "Return, O Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." So the Ark of the Covenant is an enigmatic phenomenon that seems to have fulfilled several roles. It was made in the desert just after the Israelites left Egypt. It was to be a carrying box of the tablets of the covenant that God had given to Moses on Mount Sinai. So the tablets and the ark that contained them were thus the testimony to the covenant between God and Israel. According to God's explicit instructions, the ark was made of acacia wood and lined inside and out with pure gold. Also had a solid gold cover or lid, which was set with two cherubim whose wings met protectively above the ark itself. Gold-plated carrying poles were inserted through rings on each side so that it could be carried, and it was to be borne before the people whenever they journeyed, and was to be installed in their midst in the tented shrine called the tabernacle, or tent of meeting, whenever they were encamped. In Exodus 25, verse 22, God says to Moses, "I'll make myself known to you there, and I will speak with you from above the cover, between the cherubim, for which are above the Ark of Testimony." So it's sometimes seen as God's footstool, and sometimes also as the mercy seat. Here we have the Ark of the Covenant, traditionally carried into battle, and shown here by Jean Fouquet being marched around Jericho, helping the Israelites to capture the city during their conquest of the Promised Land. And on the right here is a classical view of the Ark, mounted on a wheeled wagon on a relief from the 4th century synagogue at Capernaum in the Galilee. It's depicted as a Byzantine barrel-vaulted shrine. And here's a fresco from the mid-3rd century AD synagogue at Dura, Europos, Syria, showing the Philistines sending away the Ark. So it's only the beginning of the mystique that surrounds the Ark of the Covenant. You know, where it came from, what it was used for, has captured the imagination of many different cultural backgrounds, and the lore has developed a life of its own. Here we have a relief from the Ark of Titus in Rome, showing the victorious Roman soldiers carrying away the contents of the Temple of Jerusalem after they sacked the city. And one recent theory suggests that the Ark was rescued before the Romans burned down the temple and carried safely to the Qumran on the shores of the Dead Sea. We have a small ivory panel here showing a sphinx, perhaps what a cherubim guarding the Ark looked like. In Jewish debates of later times, rabbis held differing opinions about its fate. Variously felt that the prophet Jeremiah had concealed it on Mount Nebo, that King Josiah had hidden it in a deep cave right on the Temple Mount, below the Holy of Holies on the temple. Long before the Babylonian attack, that it had been taken into exile in Babylon by King Jehoiachin, quite difficult to pronounce that, and most obscure of all, that it was hidden beneath the woodshed where timber from the altar fire was stored. There are also strange traditions as well, that apparently the Ark is destined to return to the Temple Mount, and will be installed in the Holy of Holies of a new temple that will be built to usher in the Messianic age. Some old Arab chroniclers report that it was taken to safety in Arabia. The Knights Templar searched fruitlessly from it when they held Jerusalem in the Crusader era. And there is the claim that the Ark lies concealed in the vaults of the Vatican, yet other feels that it was captured by the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak when he raided deep into Canaan. One theory is that when the Romans burned down the Second Temple in 70 AD, the Ark was rescued via underground tunnels to the neighbourhood of Qumran, where it still lies buried. And another legend is that almost as soon as it was installed in the temple, the Ark was stolen and taken to Ethiopia by Menelik, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. There are people from Ethiopia who claim to descend from the Judeans who escorted the Ark on its journey to Ethiopia. One of the traditional titles of the monarch was the Lion of Judah, and the old Ethiopian royal family claimed descent from David and Solomon. And it's asserted for centuries the Ethiopian church that the Ark has lain concealed among them. Whatever mysteries or legends the Ark of the Covenant has, it's quite unlikely that the original could have survived over 3,000 years to the present day. And the likelihood is that it was in fact destroyed when the Babylonians captured Jerusalem and obliterated Solomon's temple in 587 BC. That brings us to the end of the first 10 now in part 2, so we'll start at 11 with the Star of Bethlehem for our next part. But thank you for joining me for these mysteries of the ancient world. I look forward to having you join me next time. Until then,